Good afternoon. Tech Expo Humber delighted to welcome Jess Elsner joining us today from Seattle. Jess is the Workforce Innovation and Global Strategy Leader for Amazon Web Services. Hello, Jess.
Hi, thanks for having me.
No, it's great. Thank you. Thank you for your time. It's great to see you. So, Jess, let's start by your stance on workforce innovation. What does that mean?
I think people could define it a lot of ways. What it meant when I started in my role and what it actually means today are very different, actually, mostly because of COVID. And as I started, it was more about building alternative workforces. So like the gig economy, building it out further so that people could scale up and down from a human capital perspective as their business needed, not as they were required to maintain employment relationships by law when it didn't fit their business needs. So that's actually where I started, at least in this role at Amazon, doing workforce innovation. But historically, future of work has been turned around and talked a lot about architecture around those philosophies and building organizations around the idea that work is an act and not a destination. Since it's been more about like, whoa, how do we scale 7,000 new hires a week who've never worked on a remote team, and the business has never had remote teams in that one area. And those people are global, some of which are in, APAC, and they or Asia Pacific, and they may not have internet throughout the day. So that becomes critical when they're in support roles, even if they are still engineers.
So how do you do that? How do you onboard and support and retain 7,000 people per week? You said around the globe, when some people don't have access to the internet. How do you do that? How do you tackle that?
I have to say, like, the one amazing thing about Amazon is it has given me just like, I get to work with people who, like myself now, are able to look at a problem and figure out a scalable solution. So it's, a program leader, and it might be, 15 other stakeholders involved, and some of them would be from like an IT, a shipping department, a onboarding department, all the people who are now ordering computers in mass so that they can ship them because there's now a delay in when the people will get them. And for the first like couple weeks, it was actually like we were just self-correcting the whole time. And so luckily, like, I work with such smart people that like the training that we used to do in person was all like put into an LMS or a learning management system, or 4, because we love to use 15 different types of the same technology. And delivered, and the process was streamlined probably within 3 weeks max. And it was just running by itself. It was no longer, there was no more tweaking. Then it became time to really look at like, how were people performing who've never even stepped in the door at Amazon. Like, there's a lot to learn just in the ecosystem in general. And I have to say, like, people just adapt. Lastly, like, it became really trying to like flush out like who were these people and what were their needs. So like, for example, we would hire engineers from a different country. They would come here, they may have a roommate, they and their roommate may share a studio apartment, and our person is on the phone having secure conversations So we had to do things like accommodate for that, and make sure that the process for them for getting extra monitors and desks and whatever was all like meeting individual needs. And then when we started really looking at like, what does the future of that one program look like? It was very, well, it was challenging. Different states here have their own tax laws. And so how you classify someone, much less every other country, but how you classify someone is going to vary by state. And then what we didn't want is like, it's how long now, like a year and a half of this. So like all of those people who've been successfully, and probably more so remotely successfully, doing their work, who were going to have to relocate, if we then ask them to relocate, like the attrition, like this is me talking, but like just in my mind, especially at a time where people have really reconciled what's important to them, we had to come up with policies that met everybody's needs. And that's really hard when you're like, if you're not the largest employer, you're the second in the world. And so, yeah, I mean, it's just a lot.
It's a real lot, and I think to turn something around like that in 3 weeks is incredible for any business, you know, any size. Nobody saw this coming. It's, you know, it seems as though the business is quite well processed.
Yeah. We were like, do you have your own laptop? We can get you all the YubiKeys and all the like VPN stuff first if you have a laptop to use, and then we'll get your laptop like in a week. So, but it was very tactical, and it was, you know, it was just eating everyone's time in the world. And you know, but I think everyone's better for like having to exercise that agility muscle, especially in an environment, and very quickly, without any option, create scalable programs around it. And then, but the overall theme for me around workforce innovation, be it before COVID or after, or George Floyd or after, because then my D&I part of my scope really kicked up. The reality for me is like, I think workforce innovation, they're calling, some people will say like future proofing your workforce or whatever. And like the reality is that you can't actually do that, because it could be a pandemic one day and you don't know that, you know, and there's nothing that you can do to plan. So I think that that having, you know, different types of employment classifications, be it gig workers, FTEs, on-site, off-site, whatever, like the more you can diversify in that way too, the better you're going to yield if it's an earthquake somewhere tomorrow and the whole country loses power, which we saw in Texas, actually. It wasn't an earthquake, but no one had power or water there, and for like weeks. And we have a huge hub there. So everybody else was having to like pick up that like workload. So yeah, I mean, it's just been a year of like figuring out how to put flexible and agile workflows in place. Right. And I think that's, you know, why you would have ever built a gig workforce in the beginning. So it all maps back.
It absolutely, it's just incredible to hear the things and the numbers and the actual scale of the workforce around the globe, and trying to get everybody working online. And while you're doing that, Jess, how does a business focus on building a diverse workforce as well within that?
Well, you know, for me, I really question a couple of things, and this is me speaking. I'm not speaking on behalf of Amazon itself. Most companies in America, like anybody over 50 people, anybody who does X number of dollars with the government and is also over 50 people, or large corporations, if you do work with the federal government, what you also do is something that is driven from a policy signed in the 60s, and it was by John F. Kennedy. And it's in a like sort of an affirmative action. It is affirmative action. And then there's also an EEOC reporting. So when we talk about diversity, the report that we have to give to them to prove that we should continue to do business and get revenue is only representative of job type, like professional, laborer, executive, and then race and gender. So in a time where we are so fluid in the way that people can identify with either if they choose, even if it wasn't the race or gender that they or sex that they were born with. So like, so I think I am looking at it and saying, hey, the way that we're looking at diversity isn't actually really reflective of diversity. I did a talk for a different group, and it was about the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. I don't know if you know that show.
We do, yes.
Okay. And I was looking at Will Smith and Carlton, and I was yeah, there was an episode about a map that they forgot. They got lost, they got pulled over, and Carlton like had never been in it, and then they got arrested, and Will Smith knew that it was because he was Black in a nice neighborhood, and they got pulled over for going too slow. And it was this just hilarious like example of race and gender don't always equal diversity. I'd hire Will Smith every day over Carlton. I want the hustler. I want the guy who's going to figure it out. I want the one who knows what's going on. And you know, from like a diverse perspective, Carlton could be as close to the man that's like right next to him that's white that went to Cambridge. And so like so in diversity, like for me, I think we have to start asking ourselves tougher questions, at least in the US, about, you know, is it neurodiversity? Is it like socioeconomic diversity? And it can't just stop with race and gender. Like we would actually be smarter to do it by zip code. Right. But right now we basically look at names, faces, use specific keywords. Like on LinkedIn, if you look at anybody's recommendations versus their name and how they look, that's actually a better indicator of how they identify. Because, you know, their boss isn't going to say, they're not going to misgender them on LinkedIn when they're given a recommendation. So, but like it's reverse profiling every way Sunday, unless you have their own disclosure form. And so like, to me, like that's kind of all for none. And we really need to start asking ourselves, like, how do we bridge the gap? And I do think that is more of a like location-based approach for, you know, the areas that are, we know that are impoverished. And you actually have to start statistically interacting with those kids at 12 years old to get them into your front door in an entry-level role, get them through high school just to be able to do that. And then like the other thing I would say is like diversity is much easier when you have like a bifractured type of workforce. Like if there are FTEs and seasonal people and part-time people and people who are remote, like, and then also a huge gig workforce population, your diversity opportunities from a regular D&I program perspective increase like so much, but also like your diversity in workforce. So if there is an earthquake and half the country loses power, the business doesn't stop.
Yeah, absolutely.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. There are some differences between North America and the UK, and I kind of think from our experience, the UK are quite forward. I think in how we're very diverse as well, and very much focused on hiring on skill. You know, over and above anything else, it's always got to be about the skill first. But I also think on a personal and professional level, that is brilliant. That is in the spotlight, because not everybody does that. So it's, you know, change needs to come. But no, thank you for that. And that moves us on really nicely, Jess, to how as a business do you support how do you support diverse talent across the globe, and how do you drive change?
I think I drive change, and well, I think there's a couple things. So like from an internal perspective, like in an organization, like you can recruit diverse talent all day long. You can have the best talent branding programs, whatever. If you don't know how to treat them, help them in the same way you would help a white male or whatever else, like continue to like excel in the organization, have the same advancement opportunities, whatever, or can they even get through a recruiting funnel in the same way? And that's what I see a lot in organizations. Statistically, it takes, if you have an African American or Black sounding name, you have to send twice the resumes of someone else to actually get an interview. That's not even an inclined vote or an offer. And so like there's been a lot of talk and training in the last, you know, handful of years, probably decade, about unconscious bias and all of it. But it's just I mean, you still see it in the funnel metrics, not just at Amazon, but all up. And I know we definitely take a very, very critical eye to that. But it's just like we keep looking for better ways to solve it. However, even if you can get them in the door and there's not the right infrastructure to support them, you really don't have any business hiring them. You know, I mean, you or companies, not you personally, have to understand, or should try to understand, that like the reality is when people get in a room and you're the one woman who's asked to take notes every time, you know, and or do math in your head because like some guy wants to make you look dumb, and women are way, like statistically, actually we are like worse at doing math in our head than men, but they know that, you know. But I actually look at the market and I say, and this is not going to get me any friends in America, but I am like, we can't hold back a whole population. Not that that's the intent, but it kind of looks that way. Not Amazon specifically, but the workforce. Everybody is hiring, you know, diverse talent right now. And so that what that looks like for white men is we are saying no to them a lot. And we have teams that are really specifically, most companies do, that would be specifically looking for diverse talent. So it's not like that John comes along and then Brenda, and we say no to John and he's like actually really more qualified and yes to Brenda. It's like they are bringing in the diverse talent first, and if you meet our basic qualifications, it's much like the UK in that way. And you can pass whatever technical interviewing we have, and you are at or above bar for leadership principles, or you raise the bar, then we hire you, period.
Right.
That's the way employment law is written. Yeah. Here.
Yeah, it's interesting to
so it's a struggle
Yeah,
every
yeah,
day, you know?
yeah. It sounds difficult. It sounds quite different as well to what we do in the UK. So I think it'd be really interesting for some of our audience to actually hear how different it is. So when you're recruiting in Europe, Northern Europe, or you're recruiting in the UK, do you have to take the considerations there that there's a different kind of system maybe in the UK to what there is in North America?
Yeah, oh yeah. Our employment like practices are that of the location that we're recruiting out of. My last hire was from Germany in Apple. But like, you know, I think that, and then I was her role was open for 2 years, so it was a really high end role. And then I was like, oh, he needs to wait till his bonus is paid out, and then also he can give notice after that, but there's a like 90-day notice period, and then he cannot, or maybe it was 60, and then he cannot move to the US for a full year after. I was like, so it's open for 2 years, you'll see him in 2 years, but he'll work for you from Germany. And so yeah, it's crazy because the conversion of the money even put him paid less if once he moved here. And I was like, I had to negotiate the offer there, and then once again for when he moved here, to make sure he kept that same, like he was in the same like percentile.
Yeah, it's interesting. I suppose the higher they recruit, coming from a recruitment background myself, the higher the recruit, the more in demand they are as well, and the longer notice periods and restrictive covenants and everything else that they're gonna probably have. So it's
Yeah.
in for the long game.
Yeah.
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 And then I think that moves us quite nicely along, Jess, also about asking you about the global digital skills landscape and what's your view on that? Where are we at with that?
I think it says like I think there's like a couple ways I would look at it is like technical talent outside of digital talent, because I think they are different in my mind. Like, well, digital for me is always like creative marketing, and we've also been saying digital was dead for how long? A very long time. And so like, it's been then mixed media or whatever, and then mixed reality, and on and on and on and on. But I would say from a digital, that just brings me back to like recruiting and building agencies and consulting firms and stuff. But digital or tech, if we can bucket them together, I would say that one of the things we started seeing early on was this reporting about like the Great Resignation and 40% of the workforce turning over in the next 6 months. And then yesterday, I saw a recruiting podcast, and I won't call it out, but it was basically saying like future proof your workforce. And I was like, wait, we literally just built their workforce. Like, we can't keep remonetizing people. Like, that to me feels like, then I start questioning, like, are people, because I see it happening, people are leaving their jobs, and I think a lot of it, if you look at probably what many of us have done, is have a very, very long period in which we were able to take stock and say what's important, what's not important, where I want to be. Is it at home? Is it being a teacher for my child? No, not for me. I am not qualified. But
not many are.
But from an interim, state, that's where we all were. And what is happening is I will tell you that I had a boss a long time ago who would tell me that work is an act and not a destination, Jessica. Because it was really hard for me to like feel like they trusted me if I wasn't in my seat. And I think a lot of people have had that experience for the first time. They've also then maybe been able to move closer, like out of that studio apartment in Seattle, where apartments are insane, like cost of living is crazy here. And they are back to the place they probably left from, and, you know, still doing their job. And if the job were to ask them to return, many of those people will look elsewhere. And so I don't think there's so much of a talent shortage, which is what the guy said the other day. And that kind of like made me like, yes, there still is much talent. There isn't a shortage. It's just that the talent is on the move, and they're going to be more able to set terms of what they want their whole life to look like. So I've always kind of went with the idea of work-life immersion versus like work-life balance, whatever. And so if we're looking at it from a real immersion perspective, like people are getting to bring more of their actual lives back into the picture. And I don't think that's going to create a shortage. I think what it will do outside of like the women, which we can talk about in a second, but what it will do is it's going to give a whole lot of startups, people with good ideas, just anyone in the world, like the freedom to like either hire and leverage that market that's on the move or thinking about being on the move. And it's also going to give the ones who are just sitting around with good ideas, not that the Robin Hood GameStop stock thing. I don't know if you heard about that.
No.
Did you hear about that?
No, might need to explain that one to us.
I'll spare you, but a bunch of a bunch of people were on Reddit and like drove up the GameStop price by millions of dollars intentionally, right. And they just crashed it.
Okay.
But they cashed out first.
Right, okay.
Okay, so we're seeing a lot of behavioral shifts born out of like, you know, just time and bandwidth to even think about that idea. And then also like probably a little bit of desperation, right, for the resources. Yeah. And you know, if women were the dominant like part of the workforce for the first time in history ever, only by 1%, but we still had it. And now over like since just September, I think 2 million have left the workforce, many of them being higher earners than their partners. And it was never even a conversation. It was just this automatic like, oh, you're the woman, so of course you would be staying home and doing the homeschooling and picking up all the excess stuff that you now have on top of your regular job. And women were just done. And so like they could manage everything. And probably weren't getting a ton of additional support. And so yeah, we've literally lost 2 million since then. And that was like a stat from even a month or two ago. So I know it's more than that. And many of them do not have a plan to return.
I think any audience in the UK and
so it's good.
Yeah, I think the majority of
yeah, and they're in. I mean, you know, it's like, oh, you have this opportunity to reconnect and build your family. again, or like if that's what you want. And a lot of women are maternal, right? And so there's probably part of them that wants that. But the other part of them, and myself included, has this whole identity that's just been swept up in it, you know? And I'm like, I always have identified as a mother, but like before I was a mother, I was in the business world. And so it's been really hard to lose that part of myself, even though I still work.
Absolutely.
It's just, you know, it's one of the parts of myself now.
Yeah. So what do we do, Jess? How do we help support around the globe collectively, I suppose? How do we help support these women, the majority of women that, you know, came out the workforce to support the children or support the family during the COVID pandemic? How do we help support them back into work so they don't have to restart the career ladder again? They come back in. Is it skills? Is it kind of refreshing of skills? Is it the support? How do we do that?
But one of the things is there still are some women. So making sure that there are programs and strategies from, you know, again, sort of a workforce innovation mindset of how do we promote from within and move those women up. And that's where I would say, like, there could be additional skills training that's needed or not. But like, we have to at least go in with that type of mindset. Returnship programs are going to be, I mean, we have a lot of them here, whether it's like women returning from, you know, being a stay-at-home mom. Like, I have a friend who is, she's so smart and she's so funny. She's got like a master's in organizational psychology, and she can like, she designed my resume, right? I mean, like, she's just, she can do anything in the world, and she's funny, those are my favorites. And she cannot get a job to save her life because she was a stay-at-home mother for 10 years. She got out of college, she got married. So all that education is just gone. So I think there are returnship programs that really need to step it up, because I have, like, you couldn't have a better friend than me when you need a job, right? And so like, I have done everything in the world to like help, and she's got a great resume and she interviews well, but after years of it, like, it's dinging her confidence, right? So how powerful will she be when she shows up to the next interview? I mean, maybe it depreciates over time. So I think we have to take those things into consideration and say, like, well, what have like workforce, like returnship programs looked like for them in the past? Like, have we done additional damage? You know, I think we just have to be very accountable, not to like the noise outside, but like to ourselves as people. And then like, if to the organization about like, or for organizations, we all sort of have to take an inward look and say to ourselves, what's really working? Do we hire less women, or women just in more entry-level roles? And lastly, like, you know, do we have the programs to get them in the door, especially the underrepresented groups? And if we look at it, women of color, of every other like group out there, they are still most impacted. So I think it's a big conversation. And for right now, we have people's attention because there's a lot of pressure being put on them.
Yeah,
and so being advantageous and saying, hey, the data that we're giving you isn't really telling you the whole story. It's great outward facing metrics, but it's not telling you the whole story. We're not looking always by male versus female attrition. male versus female attrition by job code type level manager. And that's how much, like, we need to at least get that granular.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a real collective effort. Let's, male and female, but especially if it's majority of females that have had to do the stay-at-home childcare and schooling, there needs to be a real collective effort to support those women back into the workforce. And I think a lot of changes will come. We've got a lot of recovery to do as well, haven't we, still, on the back of this? But that's great, thank you. I think that leads us nicely as well, Jess, into what's coming. What do you think is coming in the next 6 months?
I think there's going to be a lot of opportunity for a while for people to hire. The people who are having these conversations are going to be positioned and willing to do the real work. I will also say, are going to be in a really unique position to leverage that talent market. If you are able to lead with trust and freedom, like, yeah, she may not be online right now, but she could be picking up her kid or whatever it is, or he, and just not, I think a lot of people have, especially if there's pressure from them from the top, have a lot of tendency to really stop asking themselves the hard questions and make whatever's happening above easier on them. It's just self-preservation. There's nothing wrong with them. It's just not effective if we're trying to really do something for anyone else. So I think, having even a collective group, I don't know, a working group committee, be it in a company or be it by the vertical that you are in, like digital technology creator, whatever, that's those people who come together and collectively hear other ideas or hear ideas from each other and make the plans and programs that come from that, stronger because somebody's there with tax understanding, or somebody is the working mother who's desperate for the returnship, and if you get enough people to give you feedback on your ideas, some of it you can take what's helpful and leave the rest, but you'll come to a pretty clear consensus about what's the right next step, but I do think we have to have intentional programs where we are measuring. The companies that are smart enough to do that in it, right now, get ahead of it, are going to really capitalize on it. And then there is this gig economy that was growing by 40% a year. And that was the first time I built one for a company, which was 2015, I think. And now it is exploded. And so if you really want, to help the people in the lesser affluent areas, who have had access to less, who may never step inside of a corporate job or even a technology company or whatever, being able to have something like a gig workforce, it's not only smart in that way, but for us, the cost of living in somewhere like that is so little.
Yeah, interesting.
So you save a ton of money as a company too. You don't go drive them way down. You give them more money than they've had in their lives. Yeah. And you're still probably paying them half of what you would somewhere in somewhere like Seattle.
Right. Just explain, Jess, for our UK audience, when we say gig workforce, what do we mean by that?
So what I mean is it's a workforce that it's I would call it the human cloud, would be another way to sort of think about it. like there are resources everywhere that you can tap into when you want to, when you have a need for it, but it's more of like a contract basis. So you're not our W-2 employee forever. And there's a handful of different structures of that. There's 3 or 4 that I know of, but there are like websites like Upwork, or even things like TaskRabbit would be like, you know, pretty low on my totem pole from like a you know, like a real gig workforce. But there's technical talent, you know, creative talent, designers, like from here to Singapore. And like the other thing that I see happening will be something like some company will come in and say, hey, all of you freelancers or gig workforce, what we will do for you is for, you know, 5%, we will, of your earnings, we will take care of your taxes and healthcare, your like, you know, employment taxes, and we will offer you healthcare, which is very different in the US market, because like if you are employed by someone versus buying your own healthcare, it's like way less from like for the actual W-2 employee. And that company will be like the Uber of those services. And then it allows for that gig workforce to go and work with whoever they want, whenever they want, wherever they want, on the projects they want, and drive their career how they want, like in a way that meets their own. Like if you just look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, it's exactly that same thing for the employee.
Right, okay. Thank you for that. So Jess, as we start to come to the end, is there anything in particular you think, you know, we need to get a message out there? There's something that other employers need to really be paying extra attention to in the next 6 to 12 months? Any kind of hints or tips, what an advice that you could give to people that find themselves in a position of having to rehire or upscale or change the workforce around to meet the demands of what's going on with COVID? Is there anything at all any advice you would offer?
I would say one thing I would always advise companies to do is like when there's stability in the market, you, and not that this is the most stable market, but what I would say from a talent supply side, it is quite stable for now. And I think for, you know, until like year end, probably at least. And so there's a human capital management strategy called SWOT, strategically weighting average performers. So if you have somebody that say makes $50,000 a year, but it's a really bottom of the road performer, you actually can take that opportunity to raise your return on that same $50,000 that you were spending on human capital by coaching that person, and then, you know, eventually managing them out after you've told them very, very critically, I mean, very, very honestly and openly, here's what I need. Here is what I'm getting instead. These are the ways that I think I can help you get to X, Y, B, I mean, X, Y, C, X, Y, Z. And then like, and like, but those conversations are super critical, right? Because we sort of always have that idea of the person on our team who is that person. But I would say we got to ask them why. What's happening? How can I help? Is there stuff going on at home? You know, because those are the things that like leaders or managers, probably more likely, like and I think there's a difference between the two, but we like, it's a uncomfortable conversation to have. People don't lean in, they make assumptions. So I would never say to just run with your assumptions and use that strategy. But if you've had those conversations, it is a very smart time to make some organizational structural decisions to get like the highest return you can for the human capital you have. Also really look at like, we have really, really high-end principal program managers. And I promise you, they spend half their time scheduling meetings. And I'm like, can't we just get a program coordinator? Maybe it's a woman. Maybe we can teach her the rest. Wouldn't that also kind of make sense? And it's going to cost us way less for her to schedule meetings. So like really start looking at like efficiencies in that way. Not specifically to lean out, but leaning out is byproduct. The other thing I'd say is like leaning out from just like a P&L standpoint, you'll be more profitable, but like your human capital, you know, return goes up, and you have a healthier organization because that bottom performer being there at all reduces the performance of the rest of the team dramatically. But like be the winner of the people who are rolling out those programs. And you know, the like things can change on a dime, which is what we saw. So like as much fungibility as you have across your staff, you know, the better protected you are. And don't lean into what feels like people could be creating a false market or false conceptions around the market to then go monetize those people again just because you're in recruiting. That's not why we were here.
No, and I think that's really good, and I think it's a really good end as well, Jess, because it all boils down to people. People and talent are key to any business, and no matter how good we get at innovation and tech and digitalization and automation and everything else, it is still people that will always drive business forward, and culture within that as well. So I think that's a really good kind of way to close. Close a session. I think it's also worth mentioning that we are hoping to welcome you physically in November at Tech Expo at the Bonus Arena in Hull.
Yeah, I am so happy. I am so excited. I'm like all ready to like get all the vaccine cards uploaded and everything. You know, whatever the requirements are, I'm going to make sure I'm there. And yeah, any feedback you get, and if anybody has like individual questions, please do share my contact information, LinkedIn profile. Well, we know I'm not that great with email, I'll be honest. But the LinkedIn profile is a great way to reach out. And I only got in this to help people and scale organizations. So you can't do that without helping people. So I am happy to donate and volunteer time to help your listeners work through whatever business problems they're facing.
Amazing. Thank you, Jess. Thank you for that. So on behalf of Tech Expo, we're very grateful for you taking the time. We do know it's very early at the moment in Seattle, and we do appreciate everything you've done for us and the offers of helping people, and some of the advice that you've given has been really valuable as well. So thank you for that. And we really do look forward to meeting you in person in November at Tech Expo, and the links will be going out with this chat as well. So thank you for that.
Yeah, thanks so much. And you have been completely fantastic. Your whole team has, actually. Like, it's not just you, but I've worked with you most lately. You have been amazing. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for that. It's very kind. So
bye.
I'm going to stop the recording.